Okay, well, welcome everybody. My name is Paula Kolschoten, and I'm delighted to have you here today. In just a moment, we will begin our online masterclass presented by Ton Geurts, Senior Lecturer at Maastricht University. Before we get started, I would just like to share a few practical notes. If you have any questions during the session, please feel free to submit them via the Q&A function. Ton will address as many as possible during the live Q&A after the online masterclass. Please also note that today's session will be recorded and we will share the recording and the slides with you afterwards. Well, that's actually already it from my side. It's now my pleasure to hand over to Ton Geurts. Enjoy the online masterclass.
Thank you very much, Paula. Welcome, everyone. We have 45 minutes that I would like to share my thoughts with you about innovation for competitive advantage, as I have called it. And I like to connect the dots with you between risk management, AI, and geopolitical developments, all in light of a Maastricht School of Management. It will be lighthearted now and then, a deep dive into some serious topics, but I hope at the end you say, this was indeed more chess than checkers. We are looking to connect the dots. Now I have to do something. Paula? Paula?
Yes.
If I now click the slide doesn't go down.
Okay, then maybe try the... there it goes.
Now it did. Was this? Yeah.
Yeah.
Good. There we
Yes,
go.
okay.
Excuses for the technology. A little bit about my background and myself. I'm a 64-year-old, and I have a background in various industries. So if I share thoughts with you, it will be about my past in DSM, my past in AkzoNobel, my past in the NGO Solidaridad, in the metallurgic industry in Beckhardt, my several years now at the University of Maastricht as an advisor to McKinsey, and my own advisory work that I also combine with being the chairman of Circular Plastics. Thank you there. So the agenda will be a little bit about competitive developments, innovation and business models, the greenhouse gas emissions, circular economy, how then to drive change, and then diving a little bit into AI, GenAI, some examples about Ada, Otto, Lars, Stella. You can call the types wherever you want, but they are your buddies in AI, and a recent startup CrowdFox example, and some references to books. So if we look at global competitive developments, this is a website you can dive into regularly. And what you see every quarter is what are the latest insights of CEOs and what did they talk about. And what you see in the current window, this was the last picture I could take from the third quarter, a lot of focus on robotics, a lot of focus on AI, supply chain, inflation, uncertainty, tariffs, tariff effects. The topics are different from a year or 2 years ago, where you would see much more topics about CSRD, Green Deal, and sustainability. But I don't think it is surprising to anyone that we see a lot of attention in the boardroom in companies around the youngest geopolitics, the more economies that are driven by continent instead of global supply chains, the disruptions thereof, the tariffs that you have to master, security of supply that has to be mastered. But you see also more and more in newspapers, everywhere AI, its effects, its consequences are coming through. And every board member at the moment is asking, what is AI going to be for me? Is it an opportunity? Is it a threat? What do I do with my workforce? What type of new characteristics should I hire, etc. So this all fits together. Now we have all been looking in the last recent years to legislation coming from Europe, the CSRD, the CSDDD. We have seen more stringent developments in the Global Reporting Initiative 4.0, the accounting measurements that you need to take in your annual report. But we have also seen that alongside the Green Deal to diminish our CO2 with 30% by 2030, alongside CO2 penalties that in our country were even in effect, Alongside that, we got the war from Putin. And what was not expected by several membership states in the EU, for sure, though not there, was that we would have to switch completely from the Russian gas supply to non-Russian gas supply, which became LNG. LNG for a vast majority, for instance, out of the US. So the cost of energy went up, the cost to get rid of CO2 went up, the cost of renewable energy went up. So we have gotten a combination of factors that was not in our advantage. So the picture you see here is our Ursula von der Leyen from the EU, but she is surrounded by CEOs. And left from her, you see a man with a bald hat that was the former CEO of BASF, Martin Brudermüller. He was one of the strongest founding people that wanted to lead towards the Green Deal. BASF has invested billions of euros in renewable energy, is a forefighter of the change that we have to make in the chemical industry. But at the same time, BASF has been hit by the energy costs, the, the difficulties of transformation in Europe, whether it's in the automotive industry, in the steel industry, or any industry. All these sectors were combined, and what we see now is that many of the CEOs have been asking for time, for a relief on the legislation that we have put in the EU. So you've seen it recently in the press that the geopolitics that are now combined and getting clearer and clearer, the dependency on China, the strength of China, whether it's with Nexperia in ordinary chips in the automotive industry, whether it's in rare metals, whether it's in the battery business, in so many different business elements, we have seen a shift that the advantages that the EU thought it would have come to a standstill or even have turned into a disadvantage. So the captains of industry have asked for a relief. And I think it's fair to say that from a geopolitics point of view, you see now more and more that we are willing and we want to realize what's realistic, but you cannot be too principled that the year 2030 is holy, as if nothing else is possible. At the moment, we see in reality that several industries in our continent are looking for survival, for resurrection, for a new business climate. And this is not alone the automotive industry, it's not alone the chemical industry, it's not alone the steel industry. Various industries that are deeply interconnected. So I just want to share with you, we had our ambition. We are at the forefront on the globe. We are, as a continent, one of the forefighters at the climate top, but we also have to deliver reality and stay sound and healthy. What you then also see in the geopolitics, which then hits as well supply chains, etc., that we have seen now with the second government of President Trump, a new style of doing the economy, a new style of leadership. We see that the tariffs that he is putting to various countries are seen as a weapon to negotiate. It should benefit the US. It's much more me, myself, and I that a continent or a country is looking for its own benefit. So where I grew up and I've worked for a few decades in multinationals that were building global supply chains, you see much more at the moment that you go to regional supply chains or even to national supply chains. You should also see that countries start to become very practical if they have to answer to the demands of President Trump. I put a small picture in of Switzerland, but look at the multinational names that you see in Switzerland. So is it very surprising that they put a watch and some pieces of gold at his desk in the US? They want to get their normal climate back. Another thing, because we don't like what we see, we are surprised by what we see by the current administration. Some people even have baptized it as real estate diplomacy, because he's very fast and demanding his conditions. He put 20 or 28 points on the table, and then the deal has to get done. You have to give him the credit. He could get the last hostages back to Israel. That's why I put that picture on without any further politics on the table. But do they then also take care in the United States that all the 20 or 28 points afterwards are taken care of? His way of doing business is much more looking like I want to have the closing I want to have the deal. And then he moves to the next topic. So for us, he creates also chaos. But we have also a Secretary General, that's why he is on the left of the page, who has a certain style to get under the skin of President Trump and to keep him in the NATO. And to keep him in the NATO is extremely important for the well-being and the safety and security in Europe. What we have also seen is that when Trump and this Trump administration comes with these tariffs, that companies have to react. Companies are reacting in all different directions. Here you see some examples where a Volkswagen was able to start and increase producing more in the US, wherever a Porsche could not do this. But Porsche has found out that the Americans pay for the Porsche whatever it takes. They want to have a Porsche. The biggest mistake that Porsche made was that they gambled, that they believed that customers of Porsche would buy an electrical car called Porsche. That has been their deficit. So they believed in the geopolitics, they believed in the Green Deal, but so far their customers have not awarded them with that. You see the LVMH group doing their thing. Tesla has been heavily been penalized by the Trump administration, mainly by the role that Elon Musk played in the administration of Trump. So all types of consequences, whereas we had in earlier decades more long-term relationships between continents and countries and much more building of long-term factory connectivities between continents. So that leads to the fact that where I was a CPO in AkzoNobel in DSM, CPO plus head of supply chain in Beckert, I more and more got the question, and for sure in Beckert, because Beckert was the first administration of Trump, we got hard-nosed quota, hard-nosed tariffs on steel import. And with 80 factories in 40 countries, I had to juggle a lot then. Every week, every month, the management would ask for risk management overviews. Is there security of supply in our stock levels? Is there an unlimited regular supply to our top customers? And this was regularly on the table. Today, these questions are more actual than ever. But today, and you see this later in our seminar, AI is going to give solutions here as well. New data insight, new transparency. The regulatory pressure that I was talking about has been increasing over the years. I remember that in my 30s, 40s, I was a happy trooper when for my function or for my business, I could organize ISO certification. The 9001, 9002, 14001. You just go on. You were making use of rating agencies, but you were working on total quality management. This ultimately has evolved into the CSRD, the Green Deal, and the CSDDD. But you also see underneath that drill baby drill came up. And we have seen also under the pressure of the questions of all the CEOs that we are at the moment slowing down in the execution of the CSRD and of the CSDDD. It is a matter of that we need to do what's necessary, but also what is affordable. And I think what happened in Europe was this looks like a cartoon, but I have it already for years in my material when I lecture, even this morning. And then 1 out of 40 students is able to say what this is. And the effect is nothing else than if you put frogs in lukewarm water and you heat up the lukewarm water slowly, you will cook the frogs. If you put frogs in boiling water, they will jump out, they have burnt feet. And why do I want to share this? It's often happening that we, with our companies we worked in or work for, that we were feeling lukewarm. We thought we had a nice sunny day on the beach, but we didn't feel that we got skin burnt, and we didn't feel that it was too late. And I think the changes and the dynamics and also the tension we feel now at the European continent and even in different topics at a different scale, we see that we have been put awake, but we have been waiting far too long as if Europe would be the only continent that could change the climate. And what we see now is, for instance, if I make a sidestep to China, I have evidence from Stanford where they did a classroom exercise that China, with 19 5-year plans on a row, has managed to bring down and stabilize its CO2. That they bring more sustainability measures and more industry with sustainability alive with their 5-year plans than what we do in our way of working in Europe or in the US. So it's not a given that the way of working the European community has been trying to build up their legislation, their directives and their guidelines is the only way to Rome. Now, if I then look to a few of these models, then what is now happening? Then what I have noticed when I was in companies, that if change only takes place at a single product, let's say the strong fiber of Dyneema in DSM or the marine and protective coatings in AkzoNobel, but it is not the change that you try to perceive in sustainability, for instance, is only done in a certain product or technology, but not in total value chains and not in entire systems and networks, it will be less successful. It is much more successful if we see that a company, a multinational, has an intrinsic motivation to change itself. And an example is, of course, DSM. DSM moved from coal mines to basic chemicals, to fine chemicals, to food ingredients, and today they are in flavors and fragrances. They consistently have moved their total business portfolio to other markets and to other places, and is step by step making the company as such, with its asset and its footprint, more and more sustainable. You can say different things about this transformation, but from this angle, they did a total makeover of their total being. And that is, I think, what companies should do. It is similar to BMW. There's a slide later that I can share with you, but BMW does a very serious effort that their cars they sell are fully recyclable. Not a little bit, not 10%, fully recyclable. An example I want to share with you from my last employer, Beckert, is they are number one in wire rod transformation. Beckert is, so if a steel mill produces rail, flat steel, and wire rod, we bought the wire rod. 1 out of 4 tires in the world, so on each car, at least one tire has the radial steel reinforcement from Beckert. And you see there under the name of Beckert the tire with the steel reinforcement. This is a top-notch development that was done in 1953 by Michelin, and afterwards it became common good. Now, what did a Bridgestone or Goodyear Michelin say, but what did a Bridgestone say at a certain moment to its supplier Beckert? Can we not invent the new characteristics on tires? And for Bridgestone, you have to think of a company of some 40 billion turnover, present in all parts of the world. Can I not find new rolling resistance on the street of a tire with 20-30% less fine dust and less CO2? And it took quite a while of discussions of metallurgic research people to come to the conclusion you needed to move up from 0.8% carbon to a full percent carbon content in the steel quality of the wire rod to transform that into tire cord. And then that quality of steel would create a new rolling resistance in the tire. This is, for me as a layman, how I would like to explain this. It took us 9 months to find one steel mill globally in Japan that could supply such a high quality wire rod. The consequence was I paid a 20-fold for 1 metric ton of that wire rod, but ultimately 6 months thereafter, Bridgestone could say that indeed they now had a tire with new rolling characteristics. What does that mean? That ultimately the automotive industry is willing to pay a different price with a different appreciation to the tire manufacturers. The tire manufacturer pays a better price to the tire cord producer, and the tire cord producer gives an improved price for that high quality of steel to the steel industry. All in the chain improve, and ultimately there is new margin or share of the wallet created based on sustainable development in a value chain. So if you think hard, sustainability is business, it will remain business, but you have to find the right capabilities, the right opportunities to make this happen. And then the CO2 reduction and the CO2 improvement throughout the chain comes. Now, this was the example of BMW. Recently, we were allowed to sit in a BMW, and I was holding the steering wheel of that car. And at a certain moment, I said to the owner, but I have a different feeling with the steering wheel. Is this leather? And then the person said, well, this was leather, but BMW has completely switched. They only use vegan leather now. They don't want to use real leather again because the real leather needed a lot of chemicals to create leather from the skin of a cow or an animal. And secondly, if we want to recycle, then we rather have vegan leather. So what you see BMW doing is, without asking the customer anything, they are changing their cars in such a way that they become fully recyclable. And that is a long-term shot from such a multinational to become much more aligned with what the Green Deal is asking for, what the CSRD is asking for, and what society is asking for. Greenhouse gas emissions, this is more for memory's sake. I hope that all the listeners are aware of what we're talking. Scope 1 is the CO2 that you produce in-house within your production walls, within your own house. And then scope 2 is what you buy on electricity from third parties. Scope 3 is the 85% majority. So that is what you buy from your supplier and your supplier from your supplier and your supplier from your supplier until we are with sand and water, I always say. 85% of that comes from third parties. So then to say in the totality of this, I need to diminish more than 30% by 2030 is not an easy job. You need to understand not so much what you cause yourself, that's doable, but you need numbers and figures from third parties. And in the time that I was responsible for this, you always had the argument, of course, if you know my energy costs and you put the right science people next to it, you can start calculating my production cost, and then you also know my margin. So people have been often very secretive about this. Ways to tackle the whole development of sustainability have been for years industry initiatives. I was a happy follower that I was with Axel Nobel #7 in the industry initiative Together for Sustainability. It was an initiative of 6 German CPOs, the obvious BASF, Bayer, etc. And then I was the first non-German one. And then all these companies followed. This happened in 2008-9. It's some 57 members at the moment already that all work together towards their third-party indirect spend supplier base in code of conduct, self-assessment, supplier auditing, supplier improvement plans, the whole way to create sustainable supply chains. And this initiative was also then taken over by the business to consumer industry. They called themselves, they are still there, AIM Progress, but there you see the Henkels, the Heinekens, the Mars, the Carlsbergs, you see them all collaborate in a similar way. What is nice about this is that the CPO is involved in this, so he can benchmark himself or herself with peers, but you also put team members in working committees. Scope 3 CO2 was for a long time a big working committee in Together for Sustainability. It helps to elevate your people. It helps to become better at the game because everybody needed to be silver and gold in the rating agency EcoVadis. But ultimately, you all want to become platinum. It is like you constantly stimulate your whole industry to level up. So this was always good to do. But of course, this started before that CO2 reduction became that important. So today it has a different dimension. What was the trouble with scope 3 CO2? And it was a little bit implicitly saying it already. I needed data from my supplier and the supplier from his supplier. So you ended up often that companies were sitting with spreadsheets, pencils, and writing down every quarter the latest numbers. Always a patchwork and always a picture of yesterday. If I really need to know my CO2 data from third parties, I need something that comes out of a database. And this is what I describe on this slide. This has slowly developed, but today it's there. This is a picture that I was allowed to use from BASF. This CEO, Martin Brudermüller, when he was still in charge, today he is the chairman of the supervisory board of Daimler-Benz. He caused a working group in BASF that developed an in-house tool to calculate CO2 scope 3. It has cost them millions and millions of euros. But if you today are a customer of BASF, you go to mycarbonfootprint.com and you end up that you see the products you buy plus scope 3 CO2. Now, this was an in-house development, and then you see a screen like this. Of course, BASF is then also asking you, what more would you like to buy from me? And then you see immediately, if you ask for a certain product, a molecule, you get immediately the scope 3 CO2. It's almost like you redesign the products you buy, you redesign the formulation you want to make from it. But you do this not with a kind of chemical recipe, but you look to the recipe how to cook things through the glasses of CO2. Now, this is also important. What I still want to say here is this is also important to know now that there are third parties that have software developed that if I have a spend database, which is the total spend of an organization, then I do not only have euros, dollars, and whatever currency, I also have kilos, liters, pounds, kilowatts. I have the numeric volume of what I purchase. If I have the numeric volume of everything, I can put algorithms on it, and then I have an automated flow in a database of the scope 3 CO2. There are a few companies in the world now that are selling this. So if I'm the CPO or the head of supply chain in an organization, I push on one button and I see spend overviews, and I push on another button every 2 weeks or every 4 weeks, and I see scope 3 CO2 SBTI proof and ready to be published. This is really the youngest digitization, and this leads to AI. Now, in between, quickly, if we then think, what does this to do with circular economy? Then I think many of you recognize here from the Ellen MacArthur Foundation that we have to move from linear to circular. Why do we need to do this? Because with 8.2 billion people on the planet currently, and still we have calculations coming upon us that 9 billion will also happen, we consume the planet more than once. Not 2 times already, but as of August in a given year, we start consuming the planet the second time. And this is not improving. So what you see in many companies happening is that the question is, can I refuse to use something or reduce it or rethink or reuse or repair? This is a very simple list that you can use. What can I do different from my current consumption pattern? Why is this so important? And I say this as well because I'm allowed to be the chairman of the advisory board of circular plastics in the Netherlands of the Dutch National Growth Fund. Here you see a very relatively simple graph, but you see the consumption of plastic, the production and thus the consumption later on, from 2018 to 2050. It's huge. This is the growth that is not only connected to us as a population that came already to 8.2 billion and to 9, but the fact that parts of the world are all able to have a certain quality lifestyle that much more people have a cucumber that is shrink wrapped, an eggplant that is shrink wrapped. For good reasons, it's longer fresh. You can eat it days longer than you would not shrink wrap it. But the consumption of plastic doesn't stop. And the plastic soup in the ocean also not, and the microplastics also not. So what can we do to put a limit to this growth? Now, then one is you can become bio-based. So the carbon comes from C6 sugars, from corn, wheat, what have you. You can also see that you start recycling. And the recycling is in initiatives that are part of the Dutch National Growth Fund. The Dutch National Growth Fund is now already active for several years, and two initiatives are: one is circular plastics, and we collaborate with knowledge institutions, the Dutch Technology Institute, universities, with companies, with startups. We just have finished our third call, and we are allowed to bring 220 million euro to the marketplace for the increase of circular plastics initiatives, and that these startups then become adult industries. The same is for the groene chemie. We see possibilities that with renewable feedstock, you can as well produce monomers, polymers, and ultimately you have a replacement for a PET bottle. Difficult to do, not easy, but these initiatives do not only take place in the Netherlands, they take place throughout Europe. Representatives from the Dutch government and industries also visit, for instance, China, and this is becoming a very adult industry, for instance, in China. All with the same idea: we have to limit the consumption and production of plastics. We also did this at the University of Maastricht. We had an event of some 250 people. You see me there together with Professor Bart Vos. We see in the mid down under a person, Herman Worries, who is at the moment the managing director of Bio-Based Circular, but he was in those days writing the program with the university and TNO and the Brightlands to see how we got BioCircular going. There was in 2023 a vibe to make this really a huge success. You see the logos of all these companies, but of course the geopolitical developments, both the Putin war, what happened in Gaza, the tariff war, the tariff administration of President Trump, a lot has been changing gear, but I do not believe anything has been given up. It only has shifted to a more realistic pattern so that we will be there as European industry in the years to come. If you drive change, there's also a nice topic. A lot what we discussed so far has to do with many individual actions that become projects. Projects together become a program. Many programs become a master program. What I learned, I think in 2002, 2003, during the acquisition of Roche Vitamins into DSM is: how do I work in an enormous organized format so that thousands of small projects together become an engine and machine? And for that, a model was developed that you say, and that is used in the strategy consultant industry by most of the famous names that you know. You have measure identified, measure defined, measure approved, measure implemented, value realized. These 5 stages, L1 to L5, you can put to dates, you can put them to resources, you can put them to money achievement, you can put them to rotation of people. It doesn't matter what, you can monitor and measure it. If I put this in a tracking tool, in a value tracking tool, then I can slice and dice it the way I want. I can roll it up to the holding, I can roll it out per business unit, I can roll it out per function. But if I put 4,000 projects in this type of way of working, I'm constantly under control. I even see the forecast of realization. Now, this is something that is always used when big M&A work takes place. But I have not seen it too much used in government bodies. And I believe that it is also missed, for instance, at the European level. It is okay that you want to move in an energy transition, but then it should not happen that you have no electricity available for future growth, or that the grid capacity is years behind. Or because we have been talking a lot in our continent, we wanted to be the leaders of change to a better world. We have been negative about continents and countries that continue to use coal, but I think it's honest to say that in China and the US, they use coal, they use gas, they use oil, but they also have solar panels and they have nuclear. So if I today have to look, where does the development take place of AI, and where is the electricity capacity, the energy capacity available for all the AI developments in the world, then it is in the continents that use all possible energy systems. We have put ourselves rather in a stuck position, not only in Europe, but also in our country, in the Netherlands. So this stage-gated approach, I want to say with that, if that could be used into a huge program, how to lead transformation, I think we would be better off. This happened also in one of the companies where I was allowed to lead. There was hesitation in the top of the company whether in 10 years' time you could become a leader in sustainability. Leader in sustainability would mean you're licensed to operate to your top customers. But once that I could cut all the elements to become more leading in sustainability in 10 years, it became a KPI dashboard that was manageable. And that dashboard became then leading for the company to bring them to the top sector segment where they belong to. So just as a hint that this is doable. Now, why all these topics? If you connect them, if you connect the dots, and I was this morning in a group of master students, we often teach, whether it's procurement, supply chain operations, we talk about category management. We look about what can we do better about certain raw material positions? What can we do better on logistics or packaging or warehousing or capex? But what nowadays is needed, if you keep the last 30 minutes, 40 minutes with you, you have to think in value chain orchestration. What can I do better to my customer base? What can I learn from my customer that I'm going to ask for my supplier base? What can I do better in-house? What should I learn from the uncertainties that come to me, from tariffs, from quota, from a ship stuck in the Suez Canal? What uncertainty should I bring in the equation to understand the totality of things? That we have learned to call value chain orchestration. So for us now, if you want to be ahead of the pack, you talk between functions, and with business leaders, you talk about value chain orchestration. Now, having said so, all of this now is supported by AI. Now, I have here a slide of a CPO event of McKinsey in September 2024, and we showed some 25 CPOs of big standing companies, the evolution of AI. And then you see in the US that some famous brand names are further evolved in using AI, and for good reasons. We also see that some names are more in the back. But what we also saw last year was that most leading people in procurement and supply chain were still hesitating to really use AI. And this has changed a lot this year, now, and tomorrow. Because if we look at the right slide here, then you see on the left side of the right slide a classic CPO organization. There is a person leading the procurement function in a company, and underneath you see classic roles with categories. If you believe in the use of AI, then you see still a number one in procurement reporting to the board or whatever. But then you see teams that are savvy and agile. And then they switch constantly to new themes. I happen to speak to various people that are quite a lot using AI now. And if I then go to the slide that I introduce names like Ada and Otto and Lars, I have also people that call their assistant in AI Johnny and Emma. But what they mean is they have developed a personality in AI that they use for their daily work, implementing systems at customers. And they say, the buy side of my questions I will ask to Johnny. The sell side of my questions, if I implement an ERP system or whatever, I ask to Emma. These systems have become almost human beings, and they don't think like us, but they're not too far away from our logic. And the more you use them, and the more you use the right questions, this is happening. Now, this has now the consequences, and this is really today happening. You read the newspaper. Strategy consultancy firms are reconsidering how they should hire their workforce. You saw ABN AMRO recently in the Netherlands saying they would diminish their workforce with 20%, 5,000 people. I spoke to a Belgium leading bank, KBC. They have a kind of Kate in their app which is Siri in Apple, but Kate gives so many answers to their customers that it has already eliminated 500 old-fashioned jobs. This is becoming normal practice. And I urge almost everyone then to start using AI if they're not doing so. Here you see me a few months ago in Cologne, in Germany, with a few former CPOs. We try to help and support this small startup a little bit. But what they do is they have an electronic RFP for MRO spend, so the nuts and the bolts of operational of maintenance spend of plants. And no, they're not in. The customers that work with them are the business-to-business industry in Germany, for instance, but also in the US. So if I put 100 million of my needs in their catalog, in their web-enabled AI tool, they will browse immediately what all these multinationals already buy. Similar products, similar specification, but different pricing. So per request for proposal, you pay a variable fee, but the savings are 20 to 30%, plus you get standardization for, alongside. I don't want to say for free, but you get it alongside. This type of working is done with 30 people. That's all what CrowdFox is. And I believe it's fair to say there are 10,000 of these AI startups at the moment active. Many will not succeed, but the point is that several will succeed. And the sooner that you start getting used to this way of working, the sooner it will get implemented in your organization. To reflect still a little bit on it, and then I'm exactly on time, I read the right side book, Co-Intelligence, which is almost a friendly, easy evening book next to a glass of orange juice, water, or wine. But it tells you how you can make use of AI as if it is almost a human being. It's lightheartedly written. The one on the left, I think we all know this Israeli professor teaching in Oxford. But Nexus is about a lot of our cultural history, a lot of about where the original DNA and wiring of our religions came from, but then he switches step by step to AI and the complexity of AI, the possibilities of AI, but also that, of course, the questions come up when AI talks to AI, when is a human being not needed anymore? That is also a fair question, and I think I don't have an answer to that. But I urge sometimes students to, and they say, please read both versions, but get used to it. Get used to it, that you use it daily. And this is, I think, what I wanted to say ultimately about this. This is another one, but the left side one has a lot to do with this Singaporean diplomat that has been in many international roles. And Singapore was an autocracy, but it has become the Switzerland of Asia. And he looks to the other autocracies and then he looks to Europe. And sometimes a question that comes to my mind is, should Europe not start changing from a 27 democratic way of working to a more autocratic way of working, with one capital market, but also with the decision power and the proactiveness that at the moment China, Turkey, the United States, Japan, others are having, because they are all autocracies. And that is what we in Europe try to push aside, but I think it comes to us very, very often now. Thank you, and now I'm open for questions. And now I will start reading the questions. There's a lot. Yeah, I get a question. What are my thoughts on the Nexperia crisis with China and the chip-making landscape? Yeah, this is not easy, but I think what I see at a distance is there is a fact, and facts are the facts, that China dominates the landscape of producing the ordinary chips that are needed in the automotive industry. And the fact is also that in the Netherlands there is a factory called Nexperia in Chinese hands. So what we saw recently happening is that for reasons that the government knows, they thought they should block the freedom, what happened in Xperia. But I think the reality is that the automotive industry is dependent on the Chinese delivery of these chips, and otherwise the car doesn't open, the car doesn't start, the car doesn't drive, the car does nothing. I think we have to reconsider then the value chain in the automotive industry, how dependent we are on those chips. And then you have to start building your own chip industry. I think with ASML, we have a fantastic asset, but that's an exception. There is competition, and there are other machine builders for chips in the world. And I think that we constantly underestimate how far and how fast that China is going. Um, I hope that is a short answer. Um, Then we get a question, how can organizations balance the speed of AI innovation with the ethical and regulatory risk emerging globally? That's a fantastic question. Maybe you take with an enormous grain of salt first a small cynical comparison. If I can only use 10 words, United States innovates, China produces, EU regulates. This is not fair. This is black and white. But we in the EU, to my view, regulate far too much. We should, at a certain moment, take the pace of China and the United States to stay innovative and to stay ahead of the pack. We had all those positions, but I see, to my personal taste, too much view on regulatory risks instead of the possibilities that it brings you when you have all these developments in your own backyard. This is only one answer, and many answers could be possible. Um, there's a question whether I have seen impactful examples of AI being used in the logistics industry to drive circularity and sustainability. Well, I think what I discussed this morning with a group of master students, if we go to literally to logistics, to shipping, to transport, to road transport, whatever, then a company like Maersk is leading in sustainability, in their branding of it, also in the rating agencies they have, the rating they have from rating agencies. But if you ship your products, let's say you are in a certain food industry, and you ship your intermediate products to a chocolate producer, whether it's Mars or Ferrero or whatever, and then all the transport that you do goes via Maersk, then you can say to Maersk, I have seen in my data warehouse how much scope 3 CO2 you cause. Can you move your total fleet, your total number of trucks that you're using from diesel to electrical engines? Can you take shortcuts with other roads so that you have a CO2 improvement? You do this in collaboration with Maersk to satisfy the needs of your chocolate customer producer, but it prevents that the Ferreros and the Mars of this world are asking you that you have to change it, and otherwise you will lose your business. And these industries are nowadays really existing. These examples are really existing. So, with the transparency of data that is now available, big shifts are possible. Um, Is there a funding possibility grants for community-based plastic recycling in developing countries? I'm struggling to adopt and implement leading best practices. Well, yeah, this is a fantastic question. On the other hand, at the same time, you have to answer it per country. To this, Sonia is asking me this, please come to my LinkedIn and ask me a question just in LinkedIn. I have in my advisory board of Circular Plastics a board member that worked for 40 years in the recycling industry, and he is at the moment a retired manager that builds and implements recycling, plastic recycling units in developing countries. So he knows his way in this landscape. one thing I can say is small money to support is available. But the biggest advantage in developing countries is that they often have an infrastructure where they relatively manually or with goodwill of the people in a township, they collect the plastic bottles, the PET bottles, and they more or less are able to do mechanical sorting instead of chemical sorting of plastic by hand. So, and they have a very low labor cost. So the biggest investment that we need to do in machine and equipment here in the Netherlands, they do still manually. They don't have legislation on and taxes like we have in our country. So I have seen already from my colleague in the advisory board several examples of very successful implementations in developing countries. Uh, Let me see. Stage-gated approach is very old. I'm surprised you still want to EU such an old way of managing. That's a fair question, a fair point that I'm coming with a stage-gated approach as a way of measurement. But I, as a consumer, as a citizen, as a taxpayer, I can only see that the politicians that are chosen every few years and are always busy with the next election, that's part of the setup of the system, but they don't have the continuity or the skill set that industries bring. And I see too many roadmaps that should develop in parallel not being consistently rolled out or stuck or stopped. And I think we miss in a certain way the disciplined approach of multi-year programs, but also the program management that's part of it. I don't want to be too negative about the Green Deal, but it has been written in a way by people that have never been in an industry. They wanted to pull it off in a speed that is today proven was not realistic. Would we use much more of this internationally known and proven program management? I think in politics they would avoid certain, yeah, call it misprogramming. Um, then I get a question, but it is a one-liner. How can I apply this to marketing? If I understand the question well, but the value chain orchestration I try to talk about, to thinking in integrated supply lines from supplier to customer is also for marketing. The better that I understand the wishes of my customers expressed in CO2 reduction, expressed in circularity, the better I can organize and design it in my own company and with my supplier base. So I think ultimately what I've tried to share today was not from a procurement point of view or a pure supply chain point of view, it was as well for the business side of things. That's why the value chain orchestration is an integrated phenomena. Yeah, then there's a question whether AI is a necessity or a luxury for underdeveloped economies and what minimum foundations must be in place that it really works. Of course, I'm as young as most of you listening to me at the moment with my experience with AI, looking at AI, using AI. So, but I believe it's even not a disadvantage if you are in a underdeveloped country. If I would look at Johannesburg, South Africa, how they use AI, they can use it in the same way as we can use it in Amsterdam, the Netherlands. If a young bank in Johannesburg starts using AI, they can do that. They even could have an advantage because they don't have a long history with legacy systems and historical fear and legislation that we have in the West. They could move faster. I think AI is so intuitive, and all of you, I'm sure you use ChatGPT, you use it for complicated things, for easy things. But the more you use it, the more you see it, the more you precise you ask your questions, the better the answers become. I do not see that. I think even that you can leapfrog yourself into AI usage instead of becoming first an IT specialist that we had to do the last 20 years. Now then we get a question, can the use of AI eliminate reduce of the use of humans in many jobs and reduce errors? What are the consequences of this for future employment? Yeah, the verdict is out, I would say. I recently read an article in the Dutch Financial Times that we have been also very much afraid for robotics. But did robotics now really take away that many jobs at the moment? Are we not writing the same number of articles in all types of magazines that due to the older getting workforce and the lack of children that many countries have, we are going to need robotics for the labor that we use for our economies? We have been very lucky that in Europe for years we could use the Polish people for a lot of our craftsman jobs, the plumbing job, the carpenter job, so many of these jobs. But today, the average birth rate is 2.2 in Poland. Sooner than later, the Polish people need their own people. They will not come to Europe. So robotics is not debated. Now we get AI. I think the verdict is out. How many jobs will change, how jobs will be reduced, but also many new jobs will come. But I have a certain tendency to say at the moment, also to students this morning, if you only want to get a 6 or a 6 minus out of 10, you want to become an academic like Joe Average, then you have a possibility that there is no job for you in the future. Are you scoring an 8 and you want to be best in what you can give? You will really use your talents, try to excel. There will also be new jobs available based on AI. But I think it's also fair to say that a lot of the more routine work has already been changed, is changing, and will change. But we have trouble to see, at least I have trouble to articulate how many new jobs will come from this. It is also that we were afraid that the paper industry would disappear when we went digital. That has also still not happened. So these are fantastic questions that I saw. I've been trying to answer them as good as I could. It has been my privilege to be with you for an hour in this webinar, and I hope that I'm allowed to say at this very moment, thank you very much.
Thank you, Tom. Thank you for this very insightful online masterclass. And also thank you to all the participants for joining and for so many questions in the Q&A. If your question is not yet answered, please know that I've just shared Tom's LinkedIn link in the chat functionality. Thank you again, and we hope to see you again at our future online masterclasses. Thank you.